The human rights situation is worsening globally, and that is why it's important that we hold all those accountable that violate human rights.
Islam is the real problem that we face in the Netherlands, in France, in Belgium, in all of Europe.
The independence of the judges in Hungary is one of the best in the European Union.
We need the tripod of democracy, respect for human rights, and respect for the rule of law.
Welcome to the Speechbag podcast by Liberties, a new podcast from the Civil Liberties Union for Europe. We look at human rights and democracy issues from across the EU. I'm Jonathan Day. Let's dive into this episode. Summer is here, and for many of us, that means we want to travel. Planting ourselves on a beach, visiting friends or family. After a year spent mostly pent up, we want out. And our governments want us to be on the move again, too. To help make that possible, the EU created the digital COVID certificate. It's also called the Vax Pass, or the Green Pass. It's supposed to make travel easier, the one piece of gear we need to unlock a summer of sun and fun. At least, that's what the rumors tell us. Today, we'll talk about the digital COVID certificate, what it is, what it isn't, and whether it presents any issues to our privacy and other rights. Later in the episode, I'll talk to Israel Butler. He's an expert in communicating with people in a way that engenders their support by appealing to the values they already hold. We'll discuss how to communicate with anti-vaxxers and myth-busting the misinformation on vaccines. Orsi Reich is a senior advocacy officer at the Civil Liberties Union for Europe, or Liberties for short. She's been monitoring the development of the digital COVID certificate and helped raise human rights concerns during that process. Orsi, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Have you been able to get out and enjoy the summer so far? It's been crazy hot in Berlin for most of the past month.
Indeed, it is. But I have my new COVID pass.
So you're exactly who I want to talk to, having monitored the Green Pass development, and now you're fully vaccinated. So can you tell us briefly what it is and how it works?
May I start with what it is not?
Of course.
So I think there are lots of misconceptions or hope-based thinkings, I would say, about what it will be. So many people believe that what you're going to have is an app issued by the EU. It will have a green background, as it was originally called the European Green Pass. And it will have a QR code. And whenever your certificate is valid, you're just going to show it to the verifier, so people at the museum or people at the airport. And it will not tell them whether you had a test recently or whether you recovered from COVID or whether you are fully vaccinated. It's just going to show them that you are all right, you are good to go.
But that's not the case.
Well, this is definitely not the case. So first of all, we're not going to have an EU-based app or EU-issued app. It's still nation states who will issue these apps and the QR codes too. So possibly my COVID pass will look different than a Danish COVID pass, but both will contain a QR code for sure. There will be, I think in most cases, no green background. And it will show actually what kind of pass it is. So people at the airport, for example, they will see whether you are vaccinated or whether you had a test 2 days before your planned flight.
So because this is an EU document, as soon as I get the Green Pass, do I get to travel with the same rights, the same freedoms all across Europe, regardless of the member state that I'm in?
Many people believe that, okay, so we're going to have this new regulation, and then from 1st of July, you're going to have your certificate and you can just go wherever you want to go, and the same rules will apply to you even if you have a test or even if you have a vaccination pass, or so whatever you have, it's going to be the same rules. But this is not the case. Member states can still install differential rules to those who have a vaccination pass and those who don't, but have a test pass, for example. It is simply that they are expected not to.
This is really interesting because during the development of the digital COVID certificate, EU Commissioner Margaritis Schinas gave an interview, and he was actually just one example of many EU officials. And he made a point of underscoring that this is an EU regulation backed by EU law. But from the sound of it, there does seem to be a common framework. There also seems to be a latitude given to member states in terms of how the EU digital certificate is administered.
I think it's somewhere in the middle. So it's not as unified as you would expect, or many European citizens expected it to be. But so this is a regulation. It means that member states need to comply with it. And if they don't comply with it, they can be put to court. But there are certain things the EU cannot regulate. So public health is in that category. And I think actually the European Union did everything in its purview to encourage member states to give a unified response to the pandemic. But there is a limit to that. There is a limit to what they can do. So we are expected to do this. Yes, you may decide that the pandemic situation doesn't allow for you to allow all people in without they needing to quarantine, or without, say, only those who test, or those who tested need to test again upon arrival. So it may be the case that you will decide that because, with the best in the best of your knowledge, that is needed in order to avoid a big catastrophe. But please try to be proportional to the situation and do only the restrictions what are necessary. And we're gonna do the same.
So EU digital COVID certificate. Digital is, to me, the word that really jumps out there. And I know that part of what Liberties worked very hard to make certain of is that this is something that absolutely anyone will have access to. And there are quite a lot of Europeans that don't use smartphones. But this is not merely a digital certificate, right? It can be paper-based as well.
So it's not just digital, it is paper-based too. And member states need to issue in a paper-based form if the holder wants them to issue that in a paper-based form. A simple printout on an A4 paper, which basically says that this is your EU COVID vaccination certificate. It's not for travel purposes. You have to check every time when you want to go somewhere whether it can be used. But this is your QR code, and these were this is what it certifies. So we actually advocated heavily for member states needing to issue both a paper-based version and the digital version, because in the original plans, member states could choose, and that would have allowed for social exclusion, basically. What I was not completely happy about is that I was trying to convince legislators that it needs to be an automatic issuance, at least for vaccinations and test passes. That is, automatically you get a piece of paper and that is your certificate. Because otherwise vulnerable social groups may not be able to go through the administrative, administrative hurdles you need to in order to request that you have a certificate. So there still is some concerning part, which I would say opens the door for discriminating against vulnerable people, but well, let's hope that they won't be used.
Liberties was very vocal in its concern about the creation of a two-tier society in which some citizens have their rights, especially freedom of movement, and others don't. Can you talk about this for a little bit and whether this is still a concern?
Liberties was heavily advocating against setting up or moving toward the direction of a two-tier society. There are lots of people who didn't have the opportunity so far to get vaccinated. There are lots of people who cannot get vaccinated because of their health condition. And then there are those people who just don't want to get vaccinated because, in most cases, they just were bombarded with misinformation, and the government didn't do much to tackle this issue because, honestly, these people are usually coming from a not very influential social strata. So many governments just don't do anything in order to convince them to get vaccinated, but or just tackle their fears. What they do is to say that, yeah, okay, you don't get vaccinated, fine, you don't have to, but I'm just gonna allow the vaccinated people to use certain services or to go to certain places. If you're not vaccinated, well, okay, you can do so, but we're just not gonna allow you to go about your business. Member states are strongly encouraged by the regulation not to misuse this vaccination passes and not to discriminate against the untested people, not even in a domestic setting. Well, it remains to be seen what will happen and what won't happen on member state level once the digital COVID certificates are fully implemented everywhere.
Liberties wrote, quote, "The proposal should make clear that failure to make testing easily accessible, both geographically and financially, to those who are not vaccinated constitutes undue interference with the right to free movement."
So when we understood the plan to be like having a certificate for every EU citizen that shows either that you are vaccinated or tested or recovered without actually telling which of it is the case. So at that point, we also thought that, yeah, all right, it's awesome that we're gonna give people these the opportunity to have such a certificate, because it's much better than a certificate that is originally meant only to show your vaccination certificate and then a vaccination status. So if you would issue a certificate in Europe that shows only the vaccination status, that means that basically people, so all those people who couldn't vaccinate or didn't want to vaccinate will not get back their freedoms the same way the vaccinated people do. And we wanted to avoid that because it seems like, so just imagine that you are trying to get the vaccination for like months and months, but you are healthy, you are youngish.
Oh, I don't have to.
I'm sorry?
I don't have to imagine. You're literally describing my situation right now.
Okay, then, so I fortunately have some asthma, so I'm already vaccinated. So I now have my freedom to do quite a lot without needing to go and get tested in Germany. You, on the other hand, whatever you want to do, basically you need to go to a test center and get tested, which is not that big of a problem, but it's an annoyance, right?
Yep, little bit. I'm on a first name basis with the test center on my street.
But so imagine that you are living in a society where those test centers don't exist. So we both live in Berlin, Germany, which means that if you just go out from your front door, like walk 2 minutes, you will bump into a test center and it's going to be free for you to get tested. This avoids discrimination as much as discrimination can be avoided. But then there are lots of other countries where this is just not the case. So you don't have test centers, or you have like, I don't know, 5 in the city, and they are very expensive. So whenever you want to actually go to a pub, you need to walk, I don't know, 500 meters or 2 kilometers or whatnot, pay to get tested, and then you can go with your friends and have a beer in a pub. So that would be kind of like an insult to an injury. You are waiting to get vaccinated. You actually don't want to get the virus, so you really want to get vaccinated, but you need to wait. Plus, you need to pay for the tests that allow you to live a quasi-normal life. That's just not all right, right? And okay, I'm now talking about pubs, but there are way more important things that you may want to do, and you would need to get tested for. So we believe that in order to avoid discrimination, it is very important that member states provide the population with cheap, at least cheap, if not free, but so at least cheap and accessible testing opportunities.
During its development, especially in the early phases, there were some human rights concerns over the digital green certificate, and in particular data privacy. What were these concerns exactly? And is Liberties satisfied that these concerns have been addressed?
So when it comes to privacy, the first version of the Commission proposal didn't really say much about how exactly this will be done. The verification and the issuance of the passes and what kind of data it will hold, and so on and so forth. And from a privacy perspective, the agreed upon text is pretty awesome, at least so far. We will see what's going to happen within the implementation, but the text itself is very good. So it commits to the minimization of data. So the certificates contain only as much data that is absolutely necessary in order to serve its purpose. So, you know, in many cases, authorities or even private firms just in a just-in-case basis, they collect all sorts of data about you and then put it into databases. Well, this one, in this case, this doesn't happen. So basically, your vaccination certificate, for example, contains your name, your date of birth, and what kind of vaccination we are talking about, and then some unique identifier. But that's it. So they're not gonna ask you about the dogs of your grandma or the birth certificate of your grandma's dog. They're just gonna need to ask you the most important data that is absolutely needed, so that they can identify you and they can see that you are really vaccinated or tested or recovered. So that is a good thing. And then the other one is that at some point during the negotiation, it seemed that it may well be the case that verification will happen online, which would mean that so you have your certificate, and then you show it to the people at the border control, for example, and they verify it with a system connected to the internet, and then when they read your pass with their QR code reader, there will be a track of that on some server. That there will be a history of where you have been, or there could be constructed a history of where you have been, and that is something where we were not. That is something to be avoided, right? So if
Yeah.
it's needed that you can be followed through a certificate, then you shouldn't be followed through a certificate. And the agreed upon regulation says that this won't happen. The verification is offline. So there will be no trace of you going here and there, showing your certificates here and there. They can verify that the certificate is valid without needing to do that.
Weg mit den Gesetzen, die uns einengen, weg mit der Maske, die uns zu Sklaven macht.
Those were voices from an anti-mask protest in Berlin in 2020. The man says, masks make us slaves, while fellow protesters chant, we are free people. It's one of numerous such protests we've seen across Europe and the world since the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. Green Pass or not, in order for our societies to truly open up and for our lives to return to our idea of normal, we will need people to be more receptive to the COVID vaccines. But when it comes to the importance of getting vaccinated, how we communicate may be just as important as what we communicate. Israel Butler is the head of Advocacy at the Civil Liberties Union for Europe. He's also an expert in something called values-based framing. It's a topic that really deserves its own episode. But in a nutshell, values-based framing is a way of talking about issues, like how important it is to take steps to stop the spread of the virus, in a way that is persuasive to your audience because it connects with what they value. Israel, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Throughout the pandemic, there have been people set against restrictions like masks and even against the vaccines. In a lot of countries, the far right is picking up and running with these causes. So why exactly are these anti-lockdown, anti-mask, anti-vaccination causes so appealing to the far right and people who identify with that part of the political spectrum?
That's a great question. I should probably start by saying that not everyone who is skeptical of the vaccine or uncomfortable with wearing a mask is going to be someone who holds authoritarian attitudes. So when I say authoritarian, I mean movements that they don't really like democracy. They prefer a strongman style leader. They don't like individual freedoms unless it's for people who agree with them. They're more in favor of a strong law and order approach, and they want to maintain or go back to older cultural rules and traditions and maintain inequalities in society. But yeah, there are plenty of people who do not fit that category, who don't like wearing face masks because it makes social interaction difficult, or who might be cautious about vaccines because they've been developed more quickly than the vaccines that we already know that we grew up with. Having said that, as you say, yeah, in some countries, we do see authoritarian movements coming together with anti-vaccination movements. And I think it might be partly because authoritarian movements probably see that they can recruit from the anti-vaccination movement and that a lot of their own supporters share beliefs with those in the anti-vaccination movement. And I'll give you 3 examples. So the anti-vaccination movement, it's built on conspiracy theories. And research shows that people who hold authoritarian attitudes actually tend to believe more in conspiracy theories than the rest of us, than those who aren't authoritarian. A second example, authoritarians, like anti-vaxxers, really don't like or trust government institutions. So people with authoritarian attitudes are more likely than the rest of us to believe that mainstream politicians, state institutions, the media, the film industry, and businesses are betraying the country and that they're responsible for allowing our problems to happen on their watch. So authoritarians look to a strongman style leader to come in and take power and set things right. So I think that's something that they share in common as well. And the third thing is that authoritarians believe in a natural hierarchy where it's straight white men traditionally at the top and everybody else is lower down the food chain. And they also believe in traditions. And that includes sort of this old tradition that men have to be strong. And I think this explains especially some of the reactions that we saw from anti-maskers. There was research suggesting that it was disproportionately in the US male Trump voters who were opposed to wearing a mask. And Trump himself portrayed wearing a mask as a weakness, playing to this traditional image of the man being stronger and more important than everybody else. And many anti-maskers were coming out and saying, why should I wear a mask or go into lockdown just to help people who are at greater risk than me? Basically, they're saying, why should I make myself look weak just to help people who are less important and less deserving than I am? So I think that's three ways in which the attitudes of authoritarians that overlap there with what's going on in the anti-vax movement.
For me, it feels like a part of the broader appeal of the authoritarians' message is that they actually couch their arguments in this sort of freedom-loving, civil liberties, I have my freedom so I don't have to wear a mask sort of rhetoric. And they then kind of attack lockdowns and restrictions as themselves being authoritarian. How do we make sense of that language coming from authoritarians?
Yeah, it's very interesting. They use the language of freedom, as you say, and they portray the state as authoritarian. I think it's clever messaging. Nobody comes out today and says, hey, I'm against freedom, vote for me and we'll take away everyone's rights. Authoritarians who oppose the vaccine don't say, hey, let's spread this virus and put our family and friends at risk. They know that people value their health and they know that people value their freedom. So they emphasize the negative aspects of lockdown on mental health. And they try to minimize the risk of the pandemic by questioning the way that deaths are recorded. And yeah, the other thing that they're doing is trying to redefine freedom as the ability to do whatever I want. But the thing is, if you live in a world where everyone can do what they want, then most people aren't free. Like, only the strong get to do what they want. If I use my freedom to park on your lawn, if I play loud music outside your home at night, I'm taking away your freedom to enjoy your property and your right to privacy. So these authoritarians are talking about the strongest getting to do what they like, in the same way that they talk about free speech or the right to protest, but only for themselves and the things that they agree with. They're happy to accept that certain groups in society should have fewer rights. But the thing is, rights are universal. They're for all of us. Freedom is about giving all of us the opportunity to have a fulfilling life. And for everyone to enjoy freedom, we all accept some limitations on some of the things that we do. If we accept some responsibilities that will help us limit the spread of the virus, then we can make sure that fewer people get ill. And being healthy, that doesn't just give you life, it gives a lot of independence and allows us to do things that we find important and fulfilling.
Speaking of the misinformation campaigns, going back specifically to vaccinations, some of these things are crazy. Like, there are microchips in them. I think the latest is that you become magnetized if you take one of the vaccines, and people try to put keys on their neck and hope that they stick there because of the perspiration or something. But how do we bust these myths, these misinformation campaigns about vaccinations, and make people more confident in them and perhaps make them more likely to get vaccinated?
Yeah. Some of these conspiracy theories are remarkable in their inventiveness. But yeah, there are ways of dealing with misinformation that are helpful, and there are ways that are unhelpful. So I don't know, imagine that you are an organization who is putting public information, videos or articles out there. So the thing that you shouldn't do is this myth bust technique, because that actually reinforces the misinformation. So when you say, when you myth bust, when you say, it's not true that you should drink bleach, as you're saying that sentence, you're actually repeating the lie. You're negating it, but you're still repeating it. And that's what counts psychologically. And when you repeat a lie, it actually makes it more likely that your audience will remember it. So there's a technique which was dubbed by cognitive linguist George Lakoff as the truth sandwich, as a way for dealing with misinformation. And it has 3 steps to it. So step 1, start with the truth, start with the fact that vaccinations are safe, but then connect getting vaccinated to what we value. So, we value freedom. So emphasize that getting vaccinated allows us to be free to spend time with our families and friends again and to socialize, knowing that we're not putting them in any danger. Step 2, you can then explain that certain people are deliberately trying to mislead the public and explain why. So there was some research recently published by the Center for Countering Digital Hate, which shows that there are relatively few people behind the global anti-vaccination movement. And we know that they promote misinformation around the vaccine because it allows them to make a lot of money. Money from selling, what they say are alternative remedies, or from donations, or income from social media channels. Step 3, you finish by coming back to the truth again. So you come back to reminding people how getting the vaccine allows us to keep our neighbors and our communities safe and get back to enjoying time with friends and family. You should probably think about your messenger. So you need to think, who does my audience trust? Okay, so it's not just about which people we put on posters. It's also encouraging family members to talk to other relatives. It's about encouraging religious leaders to pass on these messages to their congregations, for example. And you also need to think about the tone. People do not like to be shamed. They do not like to be talked down to or lectured at. So don't tell people that they have to get vaccinated, and if they don't, they're selfish or stupid. If you're talking to another person who is hesitant, then you should really aim at having a dialogue rather than just telling them what you think in one go. So listen to what it is that they're concerned about. Get them to ask you why you're getting vaccinated. Tell them who you're getting vaccinated for, yourself, but also your friends and your family. It's not just for you to be free, it's also so that you can help those around you enjoy their freedom. And that reminds people you're talking to that actually most of us are caring. We look out for each other. We want to do what's right for those in our communities. And that's proved to be quite a powerful and persuasive message when tested. And ask them where they're getting their information from and how they know it's reliable. And then tell them where you get your information from and how you know that information is reliable. So I think those are some of the things that we can think about when we're talking to people who are hesitant about getting the vaccine. I don't think it will ever be possible to convince committed anti-vaxxers, but there are those who are, unsure and can be persuaded either way, who are probably open to dialogue.
That's it for this episode of the Speechbag podcast by Liberties. Do you have any comments, questions, or personal stories about the EU Digital COVID Certificate? Drop us a line at speechbag@liberties.eu. We'd love to hear from you. This has been a presentation of the Civil Liberties Union for Europe, an EU-wide watchdog that works to protect the human rights of everyone in the European Union.